The wind came down from the high plains with a dry hiss, pushing dust along the forgotten trail like it was alive and searching for something lost. Evening light stretched long and thin across the land, turning the grass the color of old gold. Out here, nothing hurried. Time moved slow, the way it always did on the edge of nowhere, where a man learned to listen to silence because it was often the only thing that stayed. The ranch sat alone beyond the last bend of the trail, a weathered house crouched low against the wind, its boards darkened by years of sun and storms. A split-rail fence leaned tiredly, more memory than barrier. Smoke rose steady from the chimney, a sign of life that few ever noticed anymore. Travelers had stopped coming years ago. The old west town to the south still existed, but barely. A church, a saloon, a store with empty shelves. Most folks passed it by now, chasing rumors of richer land or steadier work. Those who stayed learned to make peace with loneliness. The man who owned the ranch was used to that peace. He had built his days around it. He rose before dawn, worked until the sun burned high, and rested only when the sky began to cool. His face carried the marks of frontier life, lines cut deep by wind and worry. His shoulders were strong but not broad, shaped by years of honest labor rather than pride. He spoke little, not because he had nothing to say, but because words felt costly out here. Every one of them had weight. That evening he was mending a loose hinge on the barn door when he felt it first. Not a sound, but a shift in the air, the kind a man learned to trust. He straightened slowly and turned toward the trail. At first, there was nothing. Just dust and light and the long stretch of land. Then he saw her. She was walking, though calling it walking felt kind. Each step looked borrowed from the last of her strength. Her dress was torn at the hem, darkened with dirt and old stains. A shawl hung loose from her shoulders, barely holding together. Her hair had come free from whatever tie once held it, falling around her face in dark strands. She was not young in the way town girls were, nor old in the way hardship could make someone. She was strong, though, even in that broken moment. Strong enough to keep moving when the land itself seemed to push her back. He set his tools down and waited. Out here, rushing toward a stranger could mean trouble, so could turning away. He watched as she reached the fence and stopped, gripping the post like it was the only thing keeping her upright. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind filled the space between them. "You lost," he said at last, his voice low and steady. She looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp despite the weariness in her face. There was fear there, yes, but also resolve. "I was," she said. "I think I found something instead." He studied her hands, no weapon. Just scraped skin and trembling fingers. He opened the gate without another word and motioned her through. She hesitated only a moment before stepping onto the property. Like crossing that line carried a weight she did not fully understand. Inside the house, the air was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. She sat at the table while he poured water into a tin cup and slid it toward her. She drank slowly, careful not to spill. When he set bread and stew in front of her, her hands shook harder. Hunger did that to a person. "You can eat," he said. No need to hurry. She did not thank him right away. Folks on the frontier learned that gratitude could feel dangerous. Instead, she ate in silence, eyes lowered, shoulders still tense as if she expected the door to burst open at any moment. Later, when the light faded and the lamp was lit, he noticed the way she kept glancing toward the window, toward the land beyond, toward whatever she had left behind on those forgotten trails. "You running from something?" he said, not as a question. She met his gaze then. "Aren't we all?" He gave a faint nod. That was answer enough for now. She told him she had children, too. They were not with her, but not lost either. They were safe, she said, the way a mother said such things when she needed them to be true. He did not press. He had seen families scattered by Western survival, by sickness, by men who took what they wanted and moved on. The old West was full of stories no one wanted to finish telling. That night, he laid a blanket near the hearth for her and took his own rest in the chair, boots still on. Trust came slow in a cowboy romance, slower when the world had taught you that kindness often asks for something in return. Sleep came in pieces, for both of them. Before dawn, he heard her cry out. Not loud, just a sound caught between breath and memory. He did not touch her, only spoke her back into the present. When she woke fully, she wiped her face and stared into the fire like it held answers she was afraid to hear. By morning, she was back on her feet. She insisted on helping, though her movements were stiff. She swept the floor, washed dishes, tended the small patch of garden behind the house. Frontier life did not leave room for guests who stayed idle. Work was its own kind of language. Over the next days, she stayed, no questions asked. He gave her space. She gave him effort. In the evenings, they sat outside and watched the sun sink low over the plains. Sometimes she spoke of the land she had crossed, of rivers that ran thin and towns that had forgotten their own names. She spoke once of a Native American woman who had given her shelter for a night and taught her which roots could keep hunger away. She never spoke of why she had needed that shelter. The children came later. A boy with serious eyes and a girl who watched everything with quiet care. They arrived in a borrowed wagon driven by an older man who did not stay. The children ran to her, and for the first time he saw her break. Just a little. Enough to show how much she had been holding together. They settled into the ranch like they had always been there. The boy helped with chores, eager to prove his worth. The girl followed the woman everywhere, her hand often tucked into the folds of that worn dress. The house felt fuller, louder, stranger, and somehow less empty. The man found himself watching them when he thought no one noticed. He told himself it was caution. A rancher learned to count heads, to know who slept under his roof. But sometimes late at night he wondered if it was something else. A quiet longing he had buried years ago, when the idea of a family felt too fragile to trust. The town took notice eventually. Word always traveled, even on forgotten trails. A woman with children living on a lone ranch. Folks whispered in the store and glanced too long during Sunday service. Some said she was running from the law. Others said worse. She felt it, the way people do when eyes follow them with judgment instead of concern. He stood beside her anyway. One evening, as the sky burned red and purple, she asked him why. "You never asked me where I came from," she said. "Never asked my name?" He leaned against the fence, eyes on the horizon. "If you wanted to tell me, you would," she nodded, but her hands twisted together. The air felt heavy, like the land was holding its breath. "There's something I should say," she whispered. He turned toward her, heart slowing instead of racing. Whatever it was, he sensed it would change the shape of things. She looked at the children playing nearby, then back at him. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. "I did not come here by chance," she said. "I came because I heard your name spoken once, years ago, on a trail soaked in blood and promises." His jaw tightened. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the fear and the trust battling in her eyes. "And there is a name I have not spoken since," she said softly. "A name tied to yours. A name I never expected to whisper again." She leaned in, her words barely carried by the wind, and spoke it. The sound of that name struck him harder than any blow, pulling old memories from the darkest corners of his past. And in that moment, the quiet life he had built began to fracture. The name she spoke did not fade with the wind. It stayed between them, heavy and sharp, like a blade laid carefully on a table. He did not ask her to repeat it. He did not need to. The past had a way of waking fast when called, even by a whisper. He stepped back as if the ground itself had shifted. For a long moment he said nothing. The children's laughter drifted across the yard, unaware of the storm forming just beyond their reach. He watched them with a look that carried both care and distance, like a man standing on the edge of a river he had once barely survived. "That name should be buried," he said at last. His voice was steady, but something in it had gone tight. "It belongs to a life that ended?" She lowered her eyes. "I thought so too." Night settled heavy after that. They ate in silence, the fire snapping low. When the children were asleep, he went outside and stood under the open sky. The stars were sharp and bright, scattered across the dark like broken glass. He remembered other nights like this, long ago, when the land had not yet taught him how quickly hope could be taken. He had not always lived alone. Years before the ranch became quiet, there had been voices here, a woman's laugh carried on the wind. Small footprints in the dirt near the barn. He had built the extra room himself, board by board, believing it would always be filled. Then sickness came through like a thief, quiet and cruel. By the time the town doctor arrived, there was nothing left to save. The grave sat on a low rise beyond the cottonwoods, marked by simple stones. He visited them rarely. Some wounds did not heal better when touched. The name she had spoken was tied to that time, to a man who had ridden into his life with promises of protection and brotherhood, and ridden out leaving only blood and regret behind. That man had vanished into the wide west, swallowed by deserts and rumor. The world had told him to forget. He had tried. Inside the house, she sat at the table, hands folded, staring at the grain of the wood. She had not planned to speak the name that day. It had lived in her chest too long, pressing harder with each mile she traveled. She had heard his name spoken by others on the trail, always followed by silence or a look away. She had followed that thread of rumor across forgotten trails and broken towns, carrying children and fear in equal measure. Her past was not gentle either. She had grown up on the edge of an old west town that barely remembered its beginnings. Her people had lived close to the land long before fences cut it into pieces. She learned early how to listen to wind, how to read tracks, how to survive when kindness was rare. She married young, not for love but for safety. That safety did not last. Her husband had been pulled into trouble he could not outrun. One night, men came riding fast and left him behind in the dust. After that, she learned how thin protection could be for a woman alone. The children were all she had left. She guarded them fiercely, teaching them when to speak and when to stay quiet. She learned which towns to trust and which to pass by without stopping. She learned that a strong back and steady eyes could keep danger at bay better than tears ever could. But danger had found her anyway. The man whose name she whispered had been part of it. Not by intention, perhaps, but by the choices he made. He had crossed paths with her once, years ago, on a night when the land burned with violence and confusion. He had spared her life, though he might not have known it. He had given her something else instead. A direction, a name spoken in warning. The rancher's name. By morning, the ranch felt different. Not colder, but strained, like a rope pulled too tight. He avoided her, burying himself in work. She noticed, though she said nothing. She had lived long enough to know when to give a man space. The children felt it too. The boy grew quiet, watching the rancher with careful eyes. The girl stayed closer to her mother, sensing the shift like animals did before a storm. Town pressure crept closer with each passing day. A man from the store stopped by once, pretending to ask about a fence line. His eyes lingered on the woman too long. He asked questions that did not belong to him. The rancher answered with few words and a look that ended the visit early. But looks did not stop rumors. The preacher spoke one Sunday about order and proper ways. Folks glanced toward her and then away. She sat still, spine straight, children beside her. The rancher sat 2 benches away, close enough to be seen, far enough to avoid stirring more talk. Social boundaries in an old west town were drawn sharp, and crossing them came with a cost. That night, she stood near the well and listened to coyotes call in the distance. The land answered back with silence. She wondered how long peace could last here. She had seen what happened when the past caught up to a place that tried to forget. He joined her without speaking. They stood side by side, careful not to touch. The space between them felt full of things unsaid. "You should have turned me away," she said quietly. After I spoke that name, he shook his head. "That would have been easier. Then why didn't you?" He took a long breath. "Because the West takes enough without us helping it." That was the closest he came to truth that night. Threats did not always come riding fast with guns drawn. Sometimes they came slow, wrapped in smiles and questions. A stranger appeared on the trail one afternoon, hat pulled low, horse tired but well kept. He asked for water. His eyes swept the ranch with practiced ease. When he saw the woman, something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, maybe, or interest. The rancher felt it then, that tightness in his chest, the sense that the past had finally found the trail he walked. The stranger left with thanks and no trouble, but the dust of his passing lingered long after. That night, the woman packed her a few belongings without being asked. She did not say where she planned to go. "I will not bring danger to your door," she said. He watched her hands shake as she folded the shawl. "You already have," he replied, not unkindly. She stopped, looked at him. Then why does it feel like you are the one standing in front of it with me? He had no answer. Outside, the land stretched wide and unforgiving. Forgotten trails crossed and vanished into the distance, carrying stories that never truly stayed buried. Somewhere out there, promises waited to be broken again. And somewhere closer, danger was learning their names. Neither of them slept much that night. The ranch held its breath, caught between what had been lost and what might still be taken, as the Old West often was. The next morning came pale and quiet, as if the sky itself feared making noise. The rancher rose before first light and stepped outside to listen. Wind in the grass, a distant hawk. Nothing else. But the land held a feeling, the same way a room held a scent after someone left. The stranger's visit had marked the place. He walked the fence line with a careful eye, checking posts that did not need checking, looking for tracks he told himself might not be there. Along a stretch near the creek, he found them. A single set of hoofprints that turned off the main trail and circled wide before returning. Someone had watched the house without coming close. Someone had wanted to know who lived here and who slept under the roof. When he returned, the woman was already awake, hair tied back, face washed clean. The children sat at the table with bread and milk, quiet in a way that did not belong to them. The boy kept glancing at the door. The girl held her cup with both hands as if it could keep her steady. "You saw something?" the woman said, not a question. He did not want to bring fear into the kitchen, but the fear was already there. He sat down and spoke softly. "We may have company again." The boy stiffened. The woman reached for his shoulder and kept her hand there, firm and gentle. "Who?" she asked. He hesitated. Saying it aloud would make it real. "A man rode through yesterday. I don't think he was just thirsty." Her eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat he saw something hard rise inside her, like iron heated under ashes. "Then he found me." The rancher watched her closely. "You know him." "I know what he rides for," she replied. The children listened without understanding the words, only the weight behind them. The rancher felt anger then, not at her, but at the way the West kept forcing people to pay for old sins they never chose. He stood. "We'll keep to the house today." "You and the children." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she did not. "And you," he almost smiled at that, but it did not reach his eyes. "I'll be close." All day the ranch moved with careful quiet. The woman kept the children inside for most of it, giving them small tasks to keep their hands busy. The boy helped patch a tear in a sack. The girl braided strips of cloth into a rope for no reason except to make the hours pass. The woman herself cleaned what was already clean, as if order could push danger back. The rancher worked the yard, but his mind stayed on the horizon. He felt the pull of the old West town, too. He should go there and speak to someone, ask what the stranger's name was, what folks had seen. But the town had its own laws, and they did not always protect the ones who needed it most. A Native American tale was often told by others, twisted into something ugly, and he had seen too many men smile while they lied. Late afternoon brought a visitor again, but not the stranger from the day before. It was the preacher's wife, an older woman with tired eyes and a tight mouth, bringing a basket of biscuits under the excuse of kindness. The rancher met her outside. He did not invite her in. "I heard you've taken in a traveler," she said, voice sweet but sharp at the edges. He kept his face calm. "A mother and children." The woman's gaze flicked toward the window, where the girl's small face disappeared the moment she was seen. "People are talking. They always do." She sighed, as if burdened by the town's worry. "There are rules, you know. A man alone, a woman with no husband. Folks don't like confusion." He let the silence stretch. "My house is not the town's." Her eyes tightened. "You keep saying that until the town decides otherwise." When she left, the rancher stood in the dust, thinking about how danger wore many faces. Some rode in with guns. Some carried baskets and smiles. That evening, the woman stepped onto the porch while the children slept. The air smelled of sage and cooling earth. She stood beside him, careful again with space, though he could feel her presence like heat. "They want me gone," she said. "They don't know you." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Knowing has never been required." He glanced at her. In the low light, her face looked softer, less guarded, and that unsettled him more than the town ever could. He had lived with loneliness so long that closeness felt like a kind of threat. "You still haven't told me why that name matters," she said gently. "The one I spoke. The one that struck you like a whip." His jaw worked. For a moment he considered turning away, letting the night swallow the question. But he was tired of silence, tired of old ghosts walking free. "It was a man I once trusted," he said. "I rode with him for a season. We were young and thought we could carve a place out of the West without paying for it." Her eyes stayed on him, steady, inviting truth without pushing. "He promised me work, protection," he continued. "He promised my family would be safe if I took a job with him. Moving cattle, guarding a shipment, easy talk." His voice roughened. "Then he brought trouble to my door. Men followed him. Men with debts and hatred. My wife and child were caught in it." The woman's breath caught. She did not reach for him, but her face changed, the hardness easing into something like sorrow. "I never saw the men clearly," he said. "Only heard the shots, heard screams. I was out in the barn, and by the time I reached the house," he stopped. The rest lived behind his ribs like a stone. Her voice was quiet. "And he left." "Yes, and you never found him." The rancher shook his head slowly. "I stopped looking, not because I forgave him. Because chasing him would have kept me alive for the wrong reason," she nodded, understanding too well. Her own past had taught her the same lesson. Survival could turn a person into a shadow of who they once were. For a moment neither spoke. The porch boards creaked softly under their weight. Then she said, "He is the reason I am here too." He turned to her sharply. "How?" She swallowed, and he saw her hands grip the railing. "Years ago, after my husband was killed, I tried to keep to the edges. I raised my children quiet. But there are men who notice a woman alone, especially one with land claims tied to her late husband." The rancher's face tightened. The West did not forgive widows. It circled them. "There was a paper," she said. "A deed, a promise made by my husband and another man. They had agreed to share a stretch of grazing land near the river. But after my husband died, that other man wanted it all. He said I had no right. He said my children had no right." The rancher's voice dropped. "And that man was him?" She nodded once. "He came with 2 others. He smiled the whole time like he was doing me a favor. He said he would take the land, and in return he would let me and my children live in a small shack near town, like charity." Like a collar. The rancher felt anger rise hot. He had known that man's cruelty once, but hearing it tied to her made it feel fresh. "I refused," she whispered. "I told him my husband's word mattered. I told him my children would not be raised under someone else's boot." "And he threatened you?" She did not answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the darkness beyond the yard. "He did worse than threaten. He made the town believe I was a liar. He told them I stole the deed. He told them I was hiding something wicked. He used the way people already looked at me. A woman from a mixed bloodline, a woman who listened to old ways, a woman who did not bow easily." The rancher understood then why she carried herself the way she did. Why mistrust lived in her posture. The world had taught her that soft hearts were easily stepped on. "I ran," she said. "Not because I wanted to, but because staying would have meant losing my children." He stared out at the land, trying to hold steady. "And you came here because someone said my name." "A trader on the trail," she replied. "He said there was a rancher out west who kept to himself. A man who didn't care for town gossip, a man who once rode with the devil and lived to regret it." Her voice shook slightly. "He said if I needed a place where questions were not weapons, I should find you." The rancher let out a long breath. He did not know whether to feel burdened or honored, perhaps both. Inside, the children stirred in their sleep. The rancher heard the girl's soft murmur, the boy's restless shift. That sound, small and human, pulled something open in him, a door he had kept locked for years. He spoke before he could stop himself. "They're good kids?" The woman's face softened. "They've seen too much. So have we." Their eyes met then, and for a moment the space between them did not feel like distance, it felt like possibility. A Wild West love story did not always begin with laughter and music. Sometimes it began with 2 broken people standing in the same shadow, realizing they were not alone in it. The rancher's hand rested on the porch rail, close to hers. He did not touch her, but his fingers shifted slightly, almost reaching. She watched the movement, and something like hope flickered in her expression. Then fear followed close behind, quick as a snake. "You can't protect us forever," she said, voice low. He looked at her. "Maybe not. And if he comes," she continued, "he will not come alone." The rancher's gaze went hard. "Then neither will I face him alone." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. He had lived so long believing he deserved to stand alone, that sharing danger might curse someone else. Yet here he was, promising without meaning to. She stepped closer, just a fraction, and the warmth of her presence pressed against the cold parts of his chest. For a heartbeat, he wanted to pull her into him, to let the night hold them both and forget the world beyond the fence. But the world did not forget. A faint sound carried on the wind, distant but clear to a man who knew the land, hoofbeats, not close enough to see yet, but coming. The rancher's shoulders tightened. The woman's eyes widened, her body going still. From inside the house, the boy's voice called softly, "Ma." She turned toward the door, torn between running to her children and staying to listen. The rancher stepped off the porch and into the yard, eyes fixed on the dark horizon where the trail curved. Hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed, as if whoever rode did not want to announce themselves too boldly. The rancher felt the Old West closing in again, bringing choices he had hoped never to face. He glanced back once at the porch. The woman stood there, framed in lamplight, fear in her eyes and something else too. Trust, fragile as glass. He lifted his hand in a small motion, a silent command for her to go inside and lock the door. She hesitated. Then she obeyed. The door closed, and the night swallowed the sound, leaving him alone in the yard as the rider's shape finally emerged from the dark. The rider came out of the darkness like a thought a man tried to bury. A hat brim low, shoulders easy in the saddle, the horse moving slow as if it owned the ground. Moonlight caught the shine of a buckle and the pale edge of a scarf around his neck. He did not hurry. Men who hurried were either frightened or foolish. This one was neither. The rancher stood in the yard with his hands loose at his sides, body still but ready. He kept his voice calm. "You lost?" The rider chuckled softly, the sound carrying too far in the quiet. "No, I found what I was looking for." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "Water's in the trough. Take what you need and keep riding." The rider eased his horse to a stop a few paces away. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the saddle horn like he was settling in to talk. "That's the thing," he said. "I don't think I will." The rancher held his ground. "Who are you?" The rider's gaze lifted to the house. The lamplight behind the curtain did not move, but the rancher could feel eyes watching from inside. The rider smiled without warmth. "Just a traveler with good ears. Folks in town said you had company." "A woman, children." The rancher's jaw tightened. "Town folks talk too much." "True," the rider agreed. "But sometimes they talk about the right things." The rancher stepped half a pace closer, careful not to look like a man reaching for a weapon. "You got no business here." The rider's smile faded. His voice stayed smooth. "Maybe I do. Maybe I'm here to pass a message." The rancher's chest went tight. Messages were never simple on the frontier. They carried demands, threats, old debts. He kept his eyes steady. "From who?" The rider paused like he enjoyed the question. "From a man who don't like losing what he believes belongs to him." The rancher felt the past rise like a storm. "You tell him he lost it the moment he started taking from women and children." The rider's eyes sharpened. "Careful," he said softly. "That kind of talk gets folks buried on forgotten trails." The rancher did not flinch. "If he wants something, he can come speak himself." The rider's horse shifted, scraping a hoof in the dirt. The rider glanced down at the sound and then back up, calm as ever. "He will," he said. "But he wanted you to understand something first." The rancher waited. The rider nodded toward the house. "He knows she's here. And he knows you're the kind of man who likes to play hero." Anger flickered hot, but the rancher held it. "Get off my land." The rider's voice stayed level. "You can tell her she has 1 week to return what's his and come back quiet. If she does, there won't be trouble. If she don't, he'll take what he wants anyway, and he won't care what he has to break to do it." The rancher's hands curled into fists. He forced them open again. "She doesn't owe him anything." The rider's eyes went cold. That ain't how he sees it. The rancher took a slow breath. He had seen men like that before, men who treated land like a prize and people like tools. Tell him, the rancher said, voice low, that this ranch is not his road, not his hunting ground, not his claim. The rider's smile returned thin as a knife. I'll tell him you're still stubborn, same as you always were. The words struck like a slap. The rancher's gaze hardened. You know me? The rider tipped his head. Not personally, but I know stories. And there's one story that keeps following you like a shadow. The rancher felt his pulse thud in his throat. Who are you? The rider's eyes gleamed. A man who knows what happened the night your house burned with screams. A man who knows who was there. The rancher's breath caught. For an instant the yard tilted, the world narrowed to that one sentence. He had lived years with questions like splinters under his skin. He had never spoken the details to anyone, not the preacher, not the sheriff. Not even the dirt above the graves. The rider watched his reaction with quiet satisfaction. Inside the house, a board creaked. The rancher heard it. He also heard the faintest sound of a child's breathing too close to the door. His heart twisted. He needed the children back in bed, safe, unseen. He swallowed hard and forced his voice steady. You got your message. Now ride? The rider lingered, eyes still on him as if weighing how far to push. Then he leaned back in the saddle. One more thing, he said. The rancher did not answer. The rider lifted his chin toward the road. You should think hard about who you're protecting. Some folks bring curses with them. Some folks are trouble without even trying. The rancher stepped forward and the edge in his voice sharpened. Leave, the rider's smile vanished. For the first time, his calm slipped, showing something mean beneath it. You can play strong, he said. But you can't fight the whole world. The rancher held his stare. I'm not trying to fight the whole world. Just you if you don't move. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the rider gave a small laugh, turned his horse, and rode back into the dark. His hoofbeats faded, but the words he left behind stayed, crawling through the air like smoke. The rancher stood alone in the yard until even the last echo died. Then he turned and walked to the house, each step heavy. He opened the door quietly. The woman stood just inside, a lantern in her hand, face pale. The boy was behind her, half hidden. The girl clung to her dress, eyes wide. The rancher's voice was low. Back to bed. Both of you. The boy shook his head, stubborn. I heard him. The rancher crouched so his eyes were level with the boy's. He saw fear there and something else, a need to be brave. I know, he said. But your job is to keep your sister calm. That's what strong men do. They protect what's small. The boy swallowed, nodded slowly, and guided the girl toward the room. The girl looked back once, and the rancher felt something break open in him. He wanted to promise she would be safe. He could not. When the door closed, the woman's shoulders sagged. He found me, she whispered. Yes. Her fingers tightened around the lantern handle. He gave you a week, yes. She stared at him, and he saw shame rise in her eyes like a tide. I should not have come, the rancher's voice went rough. Don't. It is because of me your peace is gone, she said, and her words sounded like a confession she had carried for too long. You had your quiet, your routine, your loneliness. Now I've brought the past to your door. The rancher looked at her, really looked. The lines of hardship, the stubborn strength, the way she stood between him and the children without thinking. Peace is not the same as living, he said. The sentence hung between them. He had not planned to say it. It came out because it was true, and truth was dangerous. Her eyes searched his face. What did he mean, she asked, voice trembling, about that night? The rancher's throat tightened. He turned away and set his hand on the table, gripping the edge until his knuckles went pale. He meant to scare me. But he knew, she insisted. He said he knew who was there. The rancher let out a slow breath. There are things, he said quietly, that a man keeps locked away. Not because he wants to hide them. Because if he opens that door, it might swallow him whole. She stepped closer. He could feel her now, the warmth of her body, the faint scent of smoke and sage in her hair. And if you don't open it, she whispered, it will keep owning you. He shut his eyes for a moment. Her words struck deep because they were his own truth spoken back to him by someone who understood. He turned to face her. The lamplight made her eyes shine, not with tears but with something raw, a plea to stand together instead of apart. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her the way a man held something precious when the world tried to steal it, but the world was already reaching. "We have choices," he said. Her mouth tightened. "Not many. One," he said, "is you leave tonight, before dawn, take the children and head north. There's a trading post near the ridge. They might shelter you until you can move on." Her face hardened. "And he will follow." "He always follows." "Maybe," the rancher said, "but it might keep the fight off this land. And if I go," she whispered, voice breaking, "he will take what he wants from me anyway. And my children will learn again that running is all we are." The rancher felt the weight of her words settle into his bones. He had run too, in his own way. Run from town, run from laughter, run from hope. "What's the other choice?" she asked. He hesitated because saying it made it real. "We stay." Her eyes widened slightly. "And face him." He nodded once, not with foolishness, with planning. "With truth. With allies if any can be found." "Allies," she repeated, bitter. "The town that already wants me gone." The rancher leaned against the table, tired and fierce at once. "There are a few good people," he said. "Not many, but some." She studied him. "And what of your heart?" she asked softly. "Will you stand with us because it is right, or because you are trying to punish yourself for what happened before?" The question struck hard. He stared at her. "I don't know," he admitted, and his honesty sounded like defeat. "Maybe both." Her face softened, and for the first time he saw her fear of loss, not only for herself but for him too. That frightened him more than threats on the trail. It meant she cared. It meant she had begun to see him as part of their life, not just a shelter. He stepped closer, the space between them closing without thought. His voice dropped. "If you stay," he said, "you have to trust me." Her breath trembled. "Trust is costly, so is running," he replied. Their eyes held. The air felt thick, charged with what they wanted and what they feared. Then, quietly, she reached out and placed her hand on his forearm. The touch was light, unsure, but it lit something in him that had been dark for years. He covered her hand with his, just enough to hold it there. The simple contact felt like a vow. For a moment they stood like that, two souls in a harsh land, letting love feel possible, letting it flicker even while the wind tried to put it out. Then a sound rose from outside, sharp and sudden. A horse whinnied, close. Too close. The rancher's hand dropped from her arm. His body went rigid. He moved to the window and peered through a crack in the curtain. There, near the fence, was a shape in the dark. Not a rider passing on the trail, someone on foot? Someone who had come near the house while they spoke. The rancher's stomach went cold. He had not heard the gate, had not heard footsteps. Whoever it was knew how to move quiet. The woman came beside him, lantern held low. Her face was pale again. "Is it him?" The rancher shook his head slowly. "Not him," he whispered. "Someone else." Outside, the shape shifted like it was listening, and then the barn door creaked, slow and deliberate, as if a hand had just pulled it open. The rancher turned from the window and looked at the woman, and in his eyes she saw it, the thing he feared most. The past catching up in a way that could not be talked down. He whispered, "Wake the children. Quiet, now." She swallowed hard, nodded, and moved toward the bedroom. The rancher stepped to the wall and took down the old rifle he kept more for coyotes than men. He checked it with hands that did not shake, though his heart thundered like hooves in his chest. Outside, a soft thud sounded like something heavy dropped into the dirt. Then a low voice carried through the night, close enough to chill the blood. "I know you're in there," it said. "And I know she is too." The rancher's grip tightened on the rifle. The woman froze in the doorway, the children stirring behind her. The voice outside chuckled, slow and cruel. "Open up," it called, "or I start taking what I came for." Piece by piece, the rancher stepped toward the door, every instinct screaming to protect, to stand between danger and the ones who had finally filled his empty house. But he also knew one truth of Western survival. If he opened that door, the world would never be the same again. And the latch began to lift from the outside. The latch lifted just enough to let moonlight cut a thin line across the floor. The rancher did not open the door. He stepped forward and pressed his weight against it, voice steady though his heart hammered. "Step away," he called. "You don't want what comes next." Outside there was a pause. Then the low voice laughed again, softer now, almost amused. "Still trying to play the lone guard. You never learned." The rancher knew that voice, not the rider from before. This one was older, rougher. It carried memory like a scar. "I said step away," the rancher repeated. From behind him he heard the quiet shuffle of feet. The woman stood there with the children, her arm around them, her face calm in a way that only came when fear had already been accepted. "Go to the back room," he murmured without turning. "Stay low." She hesitated only a breath. Then she did as he asked. Outside, the man spoke again. "You going to hide them forever?" "No," the rancher said. "Just long enough." He lifted the rifle, not pointing it through the door, but letting the sound of the metal speak for him. The outside man understood. Silence stretched tight. Then another voice joined the night. "Enough!" It came from the yard, firm and clear, a third presence. The rancher's eyes narrowed. He shifted slightly, angling to see through the side window. Two figures stood near the fence now. One was the man at the door. The other was someone the rancher did not expect to see again, the sheriff. He stood straight despite his years, lantern held high. Behind him, shapes moved, two townsmen. One carried a shotgun, the other held a rope. The man at the door cursed under his breath and stepped back into view. His face twisted when he saw them. "You always did have bad timing," the sheriff said calmly. "Thought you could handle things quiet." The man sneered. "Town sent you to protect him." "No," the sheriff replied. "Town sent me to stop trouble. And you are it." The rancher opened the door then, slow and controlled. He stepped out, rifle lowered but ready. The night air felt sharp against his skin. The sheriff met his eyes. "You all right so far?" The sheriff nodded once, then turned his gaze back to the intruder. "We know what you've been doing. We know about the false claims, the threats. The way you've been running widows off land that don't belong to you." The man laughed. "You know nothing. We know enough," the sheriff said. "Traitor talked." "So did the rider you sent?" "Seems he didn't care much for being your errand boy." The man's smile faltered. "You got no proof." The sheriff lifted a folded paper. "Deed, found where you hid it. Original mark and witness seal intact. Turns out the woman you've been chasing told the truth." The rancher felt the ground shift. So did the man across from him. "You lying," the man snapped. The sheriff's voice hardened. "No, and there's more. That night years ago, the night this rancher lost his family, you told folks it was bandits." The rancher's chest tightened. The sheriff continued. "But the truth has a way of surfacing. One of the men you rode with got drunk enough to speak before he died. He named you. Said you brought danger to that house and rode away while others paid the price." The man took a step back. Fear finally cracked through his bravado. "You can't prove that." The sheriff's eyes were steady. "Don't need to. The land knows. And so do the people who've been watching you take what wasn't yours." The townsman moved closer. The man looked from face to face, measuring odds. Then his gaze snapped to the rancher, filled with old bitterness. "You should have stayed quiet." The rancher met his stare. "I tried." "You wouldn't let the past rest?" The sheriff nodded to the men. "Take him." The rope was raised. The struggle was brief and ugly, but it ended quickly. No shots fired, no blood spilled. Just a man finally held still by the weight of his own choices. When it was done, the yard fell quiet again. Crickets resumed their song like nothing had happened. The rancher stood there, shaking now that the danger had passed. The sheriff approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said. "Some things take years before folks are brave enough to face them." The rancher nodded, unable to speak. The sheriff glanced toward the house. "She and the children safe?" "Yes." "Good." He hesitated. "Town owes her an apology." "Maybe more." The rancher watched as the sheriff and the others led the man away, disappearing into the dark the same way trouble often did, leaving echoes behind. When the yard was empty again, he stood alone for a moment, breathing in the night. Then he turned back to the house. Inside, the woman stood waiting, the children pressed close. Her eyes searched his face, desperate for truth. "It's over," he said softly. She covered her mouth, tears finally breaking free. Not loud, just the quiet kind that came when fear let go. The boy stepped forward. Is he gone? Yes, the rancher replied. He won't be coming back? The girl wrapped her arms around his leg without thinking. He stiffened, then slowly rested a hand on her head. The simple touch unraveled him. The next days passed gentle and slow, like the land itself was giving them time to heal. Word spread through the old west town. The whispers changed, heads lowered in shame. Doors opened where they had once closed. The sheriff came by with papers. The land near the river was returned to the woman, rightful and clear. She held the document with trembling hands, not because of what it gave her, but because of what it took back. She chose not to leave. The rancher did not ask her to stay. He did not need to. Life settled into a new rhythm. The boy learned the land and grew surer of himself. The girl laughed more, her fear slowly loosening its grip. The woman worked alongside the rancher, shoulder to shoulder, learning the quiet language they both understood. They did not rush anything. Love in the Wild West was not loud. It was built in small moments, shared coffee at dawn, a hand offered after a long day, silence that felt full instead of empty. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky soft, the rancher stood near the graves beyond the cottonwoods. He had not visited them in years. The woman joined him, respectful and still. I never came back here because I was afraid, he said. Afraid of remembering. Afraid of letting anything new grow where so much was lost. She placed her hand in his, gentle and sure. The land doesn't forget, she said. But it knows how to grow again. He looked at her then, really looked. At the strength that had walked into his life wounded and unbroken. At the children who had filled his house with sound again. You staying? He asked quietly. She smiled, small but certain. If you'll have us. He squeezed her hand. I already do. The season's turned. The ranch held laughter again. The fence was repaired. The house felt warmer. Not because the past was gone, but because it no longer ruled them. On a quiet night, long after the children slept, they sat on the porch together, watching the stars scatter across the sky. Do you ever miss the quiet? She asked. He thought about it, about the years of loneliness he had called peace. Then he shook his head. No, she leaned into him, and he rested his arm around her shoulders, careful and grateful. The forgotten trails still stretched wide beyond the ranch, carrying stories of loss and survival. But here, in this small place the West had tried to break, something lasting had taken root. Not perfect, not easy, but earned. And as the wind moved gently through the grass, the rancher knew that for the first time in a long while, the land was not just something he survived. It was home.